Hello and welcome to DFS Coach Talk. It is Wednesday, May 6th, 2020. I am Andrew Hanson, joined by Santino Caccone. And if you're not watching on YouTube, you should really tune in because Santino is rocking the black and red as we get ready to preview the Atlanta Falcons today. Santino looking smooth over there.
Thank you. Yesterday we were on with the Bucks, and I unknowingly put on a red sweatshirt, not realizing until we got on the pod that I'm repping the colors. Today, I knowingly repped the colors and put on a black and red, so I was prepared for that one.
I'm glad you're leading the charge for us, representing here. I don't really have any good black and red, so I just went with the dark blue. But this is a back-to-back day for the Andrew and Santino pairing. And I just happened to notice today on Twitter that there is a comedian named Andrew Santino. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, actually, the funniest thing is he's in the show called Dave that me and my girlfriend streamed last week. We binge watched it, and I looked up the list on IMDb, and I said, "Oh my God, his name's Andrew Santino," because I saw it on the end of the credits, and that's pretty funny that you just mentioned that because I just found him out a couple days ago. Also, that show is hilarious if you've never watched it.
I haven't seen it, but I just watched a stand-up comedy clip of him today because I needed to know if he was funny, and it was good. And I guess he also made a cameo on the Office at one point. So
I don't remember him there, but
yeah, it's just like a one show thing, small role. But I may have to dig that episode up and find him. But speaking of names, it's also Hanson Day, according to Twitter. So we got to celebrate Hanson Day. And speaking of family, it's my brother-in-law's birthday. So happy birthday, Chris.
Congratulations. Happy birthday.
Yeah. So this is birthday family day and Andrew Santino Day. Whether you like it or not, we are back as we continue our tour around the NFL. We're doing a virtual tour here, 32 days in a row, one NFL team per day. And we've been cruising through the NFC South this week. We'll have the Saints on tomorrow. But today we're going to go to the Atlanta Falcons preview. And before I forget, we should talk about our crew a little bit. We are part of DFS Coach Talk. We cover the NFL, the MLB, and NBA. And right now we're actually covering the KBO. We provided lineups last night to our members, and we had our second consecutive winning night, 2 for 2 to start the season. So that's one of the perks. If you want to become a member, you can pick up a weekly, monthly, or annual membership right now, and that'll be frozen until one of the American Pro Sports returns. But in the meantime, we're providing free lineups for KBO, and 2 for 2 start isn't too shabby, Santino.
No, it's pretty good. Like I mentioned yesterday, a league we don't really know or nobody really knows. 2 for 2. Coaching yourself, I know you guys are digging in there, getting all the details and finding out all the nooks and crannies to how to win a lineup in the KBO league, and so far it's so good.
Yeah, it's been fun to dig in and just evaluate these new players. And one of the things we pride ourselves on DFS Coach Talk is using the eye test and hand building lineups. So we're scouting those players as much as we can. I watched the first night. I taped the telecast for the second day, and I'm a little bit tired. I must tell you, it's a tough schedule, so I'm trying to battle through. But do come and join DFS Coach Talk. We'd love to have you. Santino, the virtual tour continues with the Falcons, and your black and red squad went 7-9 last year. Some big changes with this squad, not quite like Tampa Bay, but Todd Gurley, I think you've heard of him. He's new in town this year.
Yeah, Todd Gurley. Their big offseason acquisition on the offensive side. Pro Bowl type running back. I know last year didn't have the season that you'd expect, but the touchdowns are always there with this guy. Even when he was playing through that knee condition, he gets in the end zone, and he gets in the end zone unlike few others. So he's even with that, and if that scares you off and his price tag's lower, just know that even if he gets you 40 yards, he might get in the end zone.
Yeah, 14 touchdowns last year, despite having basically his career worst year. And we'll detail some more of those stats here as we go. But some other changes on offense that we'll get to, but let's talk about the team as a whole last year. They Dan Quinn and Dirk Cutter are coming back to lead the squad and lead the offense. They have a new defensive coordinator in Raheem Morris, and that's probably the real key for these guys, because on offense they were successful through the air. They were third in the league in passing yardage and eighth in touchdowns, relying on the veteran leadership of Matt Ryan. They were not successful on the ground. They were 30th in the league in rushing yardage. On the defensive side, Raheem Morris, I want to start with him at the top because he's an interesting guy. He's a former head coach. He was the passing game coordinator for the last 3 years for the Falcons, but he was also calling some plays on the defensive side. So Dan Quinn basically stepped aside, gave Morris the title of defensive coordinator. And we've been talking this week, Santino, about how strong this conference is in terms of offense and these quarterbacks. We had Brady yesterday, Drew Brees tomorrow. Obviously, Carolina went with Bridgewater. And, the primary focus for Morris is going to be how to stop these quarterbacks in this division.
Yeah, definitely. And the weak point of the Falcons last year was their pass defense. They were really good against the run. They overhauled this defense with their prime acquisition was Dante Fowler, star linebacker there. Their first couple picks in the draft, all defense. AJ Terrell was their first round pick, cornerback. He's probably going to step into a prominent role right off the bat. I would assume he's going to be their number one corner. They also drafted Michael Walker and Marlon Davidson. I would assume Marlon Davidson's going to rotate in behind their star defensive tackle there, Grady Jarrett. But Michael Walker might win the job on the outside from day one as well. But yeah, like you mentioned, it's going to be about pass defense. Last year, they were 22nd in the league in passing yards against, which isn't great, but they were middle of the pack in all the other stuff, like 20-plus yard pass plays. They were 10th, 40-plus yard pass plays. They were 12th. So not terrible, but sacks, that's where Dante Fowler and everybody, Grady Jarrett, and the revamped defense is going to hopefully come in play. But they were almost last in the league in sacks with 28. The only team worse than them was the Miami Dolphins. But besides that, they were a pretty good team in terms of getting takeaways. They had 12 interceptions, which was 17th. They were top 10 in the league in forced fumbles with 17. But unfortunately, they only recovered 8 of them, under 50%, which would rank them 21st. I would expect a little bit more luck in that department, at least 60%, jump them up there. But as far as a fantasy and DFS defense, they had 4 defensive special teams touchdowns, which was tied for 5th. There was only a couple teams. They were tied with a couple teams there. They were a very good tackling team. If you look, they were they were second to last in solo tackles, which says, oh, maybe they're not great, but they were second overall in assisted tackles, which any good defense, you want to have people swarming together and have gang tackles, and so you don't let those broken tackles go through. So that's a good sign for a defense. Pass defended, they were 27th. I think they'll take a step forward with all these additions, but we're going to have to highlight that secondary. Can AJ Terrell and a returning Keanu Neal, will they provide the upgrade that they didn't have last year, or can this team still be attacked through the air? Especially as you mentioned, there's going to be a Brady in there now. There's going to be a Bridgewater, and there's always that Drew Brees in this conference that they're going to have to play 2 times a year each. So that's the big thing. If they can stop the pass, this might be a defense we can target some games on DFS. If they can't, the other way around. If they can stop the pass, we won't target them. But if they can't, very targetable.
Yeah, great breakdown there. A lot of interesting nuggets. The primary takeaway for me is it sounds like they need to make big plays, more big plays. You scoop up those fumbles, get to the quarterback, get some pressure on the quarterback. And you mentioned Fowler Jr. coming over. They signed him. He had 11.5 sacks last year, so that's huge. They went heavy on defense in the draft. This is it's been an arms race in this division on defense to try to bulk up and deal with these quarterbacks. much has been made about the Panthers taking all defensive players in the 2020 draft, and Atlanta, sort of under the radar, all they took on offense was a lineman, and they drafted a punter, but no skill position players on offense. So they really went heavy on the defensive side to try to shore that group up. And we talked yesterday about Tampa and their strong running defense. Atlanta just doesn't have a strength on defense. And
Yeah.
Coach Quinn is known as a defensive guy coming over from Seattle, and I think he's really feeling the pressure here. He and Thomas Dimitroff, the GM, they just haven't gotten it done recently with these absolute star offensive players, Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, and we'll get into them here in a bit, but they need to start producing and winning. And the one thing I'll say about 2019 as a whole is I'm impressed because they started off 1-7, then they had a bye week, and somehow they pulled together to finish 6-2 down the stretch. And
They won their last four without with a lot of injuries as well. Yeah.
Yeah, very impressive finish. So maybe they're building something. Maybe hopefully they can build on that finish. And with, Morris taking over the defense and these changes that you mentioned with the transactions and the transition of these young players from the draft, hopefully their defense can step up and potentially be a strength.
Yeah.
On the offensive side, again, very impressive through the air. They were 5th in overall yardage because of that almost 5,000 yards through the air. But again, major problem on the rushing attack. And we'll get into that big swap here in a minute. But let's start off with the quarterback, as we usually do. Matt Ryan, entering his 13th year, led the league in completions last year with 408, and he only played 15 games. So they threw it often, and he completed a bunch of his passes. What are you expecting from him in 2020?
So Matt Ryan is an interesting guy. You mentioned he led the league in completions. He also led the league in attempts attempts per game. And he had a 66.2% completion rating. He had almost 300 yards passing per game last year. But the interesting thing that I found out with Matt Ryan is if you look at his career, his even year number years that he plays, those are his best years. Weirdly, since 2010, every even year except for 2018, he's made a Pro Bowl. Not every odd year he hasn't, but every even year he's made the Pro Bowl. And the 2018 year that he didn't make the Pro Bowl, he had 4,924 yards, 35 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions with a 108.1 quarterback rating. So I don't know how he didn't make it, but it's pretty much, this is 2020. This is an even year. So if we're going by the history of this guy, I think a bounce back's inevitable. He had 26 touchdowns last year, 14 interceptions, a 92.1 QB rating, which isn't great. He averages about 26 touchdowns a year. But again, if you look at his fantasy production and overall production on those even years, he was the last two. 2018, he was the number 2 quarterback overall. 2016, he was the number 2 quarterback overall, and he was the MVP. I think he could easily approach that 30 touchdown mark again. We'll see what happens. I don't know if we'll get those same amount of attempts if the defense improves and they're not in shootouts and they're not playing from behind so much. But I mean, you know what you're going to get from him on a game-to-game basis, especially in the right matchup. He's definitely a guy that you're gonna target all the time. He's finished 6 out of the last 10 years. He's finished in the top 10, and as I mentioned, they're mainly all in the even years. So if I'm gonna attack him and draft him or and play him in DFS, it's gonna be those even years because for some reason he just every other year he goes from top 15 to top 3.
I love that. I love the even year focus. It reminds me of, was it the San Francisco Giants in MLB who would only win their World Series in the odd years?
I think that's what it was. Yeah, they kept. It's just a weird phenomenon. how that something like that happens. But when it happens, this is going back to 2010. When it happens like that, it's just very weird. Five times he's a Pro Bowler, only in even years. That's just one time it's okay. Two times maybe something, but 4 or 5 times that's a trend to me.
It is. And, there's something to that psychologically. You have a bit of a down year, you work a little bit harder, your focus comes in a little bit sharper. So that'll be fun to see if he repeats that trend. Um, he ended up with 9 of his 15 games last year with at least 2 touchdown passes. So another one of those guys where you can really target him in certain weeks. Had 8 of his games over 20 fantasy points. So pretty solid, but certainly would like to see a little bit better production, cut down on the turnovers. He didn't quite have that 2-to-1 ratio in terms of touchdowns. If he ever goes down, I do want to mention Matt Schaub briefly because I had sort of forgotten that he got a start last year against Seattle, and he went 39 of 52 for 460 yards, 1 touchdown and 1 pick for a 38-year-old. Pretty impressive. So just keep that in the back of your mind in case something happens with Ryan in this even year. We don't expect it. We expect him out there, but just in case.
Yeah. And Matt Schwab will be pennies on the dollar. And when you're throwing to the best wide receiver in the game and then a really, really good number 2, I mean, for pennies on the dollar, you can't go wrong with that one.
Yeah, he was 4.7K that week on DraftKings, and he brought back 25.4 fantasy points. So he really stepped up to the challenge. Now, we referenced it a little bit. The big change in the backfield. So Devontae Freeman, the longtime starter there, they released him back in March, and they took on $6 million in dead cap money to do it. 28-year-old. He only averaged 3.6 yards per carry last year, ended up with just over 1,000 scrimmage yards, and he just sort of had that downward trend. And they said enough is enough. Let's get younger. And so they bring in Todd Gurley, which the other thing that surprised me is it seems like he's been a star for so long, but yet he's only 25 years old. So
yeah,
you already referenced the knee problem, but what do you think about this trade for releasing Freeman and signing Gurley?
I mean, Freeman had his 2 best years, the only years he had over 1,000 yards rushing, when Kyle Shanahan was there as the offensive coordinator. Take out those 2 years, and he's just been a disappointment, honestly. I know in 2018 he got hurt in his second game in, but last year he was playing hurt as well. But when he was in there, he was just bad, downright bad. 656 yards on 184 total carries for 3.6 yards per attempt. I know this line, we can get to it. The line wasn't doing him any favors. Besides Jake Matthews and Alex Mack, their big signing last year, James Carpenter, was bad before he got hurt. He was flat out bad. They drafted 2 guys on the right side. Lindstrom was hurt most of the year, but when he was in there, he was effective. And Caleb McRae was graded 34th out of 38 qualifying right tackles, so he was flat out bad as well. But Freeman hasn't been good since Shanahan left. But now you're replacing him with a guy who's a Pro Bowler. We mentioned it. Todd Gurley is one of the most talented running backs in the league, hands down. Last year, we mentioned it earlier, he was dealing with those knee problems, and those might not go away. That's something that he'll probably have to play with the rest of his career. But even a 80% Todd Gurley is going to bring you back better numbers than a 100% Devontae Freeman. He had 857 carries last year. His second worst yards per carry in his career at 3.8. But he still had 14 touchdowns. I mean, the worst that he brought you back was 14 touchdowns and over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. That's not a bad guy to invest for. And I'm assuming that his price is going to be not at the elite level that it was prior to last year, because you're getting that injury concern. Now he has a new offense, worse offensive line. But Todd Gurley, if he comes back and looks a little bit like he was before that, he's shaking off those knee injuries. Um, this is a guy who's going to be really good for you. And if you look, he was the 14th back in PPR last year. I know that's what DraftKings uses. So 14th overall, not bad at all. And he was also the 14th in FanDuel in half PPR. And then he was 13th the year before that, or he was 13th in points per game and 16th in points per game the year before that. I mean, not the year before that. I forgot what I was saying there. But that's still a pretty good back for a cheaper price than if you're not paying up for the studs right there.
Yeah, in terms of the price that the Falcons paid, they just signed him for 1 year at 6 million. So pretty low risk for him. But I do think they're going to feed him the rock and give him a bunch of touches. And uh, hey, they only have him signed for 1 year. It's not like it's not like it's not like McCaffrey in Carolina where they need to think about him long term. And you mentioned the 1,000 scrimmage yards, and this is a number that I thought was pretty funny. So last year, Freeman's total scrimmage yards 1,066, and Gurley 1,064. But the way that they got there was a lot different. You mentioned Gurley's ranking in PPR, and that's in large part because of those touchdowns and the 14 touchdowns. He knows how to get in the end zone. Sean McVay, famously basically kicking himself for not using Gurley more last year. Even though he was down in terms of his yards per carry, he only had 254 touches. And I think the Falcons will give him the ball a lot more often this year. It was his career low in carries last year, career low in rushing yards. And even through the air, Gurley had his lowest numbers in 4 years in terms of receptions and yardage. So just down across the board in terms of touches and production, and certainly due in part to injury, but also because of the game calling. And I think he'll get the ball more. And also, you mentioned his price tag on DraftKings. It was down a little bit last year in that 6 to 7K range. And if he's in that range again, I'll certainly target him early in the season.
Yeah, I mean, last year's pretty much his floor. He can only improve from that, and that's double-digit touchdowns and 1,000 yards. And when you look at this, like you mentioned, they only signed him to a 1-year deal. It's a 1-year prove-it deal for himself as well, because if he comes out firing like a 90% Todd Gurley that we saw when he won the Offensive Player of the Year 2 years ago, or even 2018, he's going to work himself into a pretty decent long-term contract, and that's what he's hoping for. And it's no risk to the Falcons to give him all these carries because they don't have him for the long haul. They're just trying to win now. And if you look at the rest of the roster or running back room, we'll get to it. Ito Smith, Brian Hill, those are the next two guys up. There's no third down back here. Nobody who you can put in there and say, okay, we'll rest Gurley on third downs because this guy's a pass-catching specialist. Gurley is that pass-catching specialist. So if he's up for it, he's going to have a 3-down feature role here. And your floor is what you got last year. And it's just, I don't expect that again because he is this talented. The only thing that's going to stop him is that knee concern. But for a cheap price playing on daily fantasy, I'll take it.
I can just imagine the conversation between Thomas Dimitroff and Gurley. Todd, are you up for being our 3-down back? So yeah, I'm going to be out there for all 3 downs. Yes, please sign me up. Yeah, I want to earn a much bigger contract. Yes. And
exactly.
And then they chuckle about the other guys in the running back room that you just mentioned because and they have the little inside joke that we know that none of these guys we don't want these guys to take touches from you. But if they have to, Santino, talk to me about Ito Smith and Brian Hill.
Yeah, if something happens to Gurley in the event that he has to miss games, if he's playing, he's that guy. He's going to be the featured guy. But if, in the event that he's not, I think Ito Smith takes that 1A role and Brian Hill falls in line with the 1B role. We saw it last year when Freeman initially went down. Ito Smith was the guy who jumped up first, and then he had a concussion/neck injury and he went on IR. But he's not bad. He's a decent fill-in. Nothing that jumps off the page to you, but nothing that's gonna scare you away in terms of his DFS value. I mean, he's going to be walking into anytime a 3-down back goes down, you're walking into a pretty good amount of touches and snaps in your favor, and he's not going to cost you a pretty penny. It's just going to be very cheap. But he'll probably split carries with the dreaded RBBC with Brian Hill, who also not too bad himself. He didn't have the greatest fill-in year last year, but he would step in and see maybe 5 to 10 carries a game. I wouldn't actively target either of them until one of them separates from the pack, and then while their price is still cheaply down there, then you can get a possible 3-down back guy who could potentially see 15 to 20 touches a game for 3,000 to 4,000 4K on either DraftKings or FanDuel.
Yeah, nice breakdown there. Just nothing that's very exciting. Brian Hill did end up getting more touches down the stretch with Ito Smith out of the picture. He ended up getting the 78 carries, 4.1 yards per carry. The most yardage he got in any game, though, was only 66 yards. And the most carries he got, he did have one week with 20 carries, but he only got 61 yards. So, just number after number of why we're not excited about any of these guys.
Yeah. But getting those 20 carries, if you give that to Gurley, there's a very, very good chance that even if the yardage isn't there, he's going to fall into the end zone because he's been doing that throughout his career.
Yes, he has. All right, well, let's turn to the more exciting wide receiver core that's got a little bit more depth to it. And we don't need to really talk about depth if we can start out talking about Julio Jones. Man,
Who?
this guy is this guy is a stud. Let's celebrate Julio Jones here on Atlanta Falcons Day.
Absolute stud. Yeah. Julio Jones, it's funny. He's the guy that is consistently in the upper echelon of wide receivers, but throughout his career, you're always saying, "Oh, this so-and-so is the best wide receiver." When it first started, it was Calvin Johnson's the best wide receiver in the game. Then it went to Antonio Brown, and then it went to DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Thomas, etc. Odell Beckham Jr. was in there. You always said Julio Jones was among them, but we never said he was them. But if you look at this guy's numbers throughout his career, it's very hard to say that he isn't. And if a quick breakdown of look at his yards per game average. Rookie year in 2011, he was 11th. Second year, he was 12th in yards per game. 2013, he only played 5 games, but if you extrapolate that through a whole season, this is where this insane run starts to happen for the next 7 years. He was second in yards per game. 2015 first, 2016 first, 2017 third, 2018 first, 2019 third. It's nobody in his career. Only 2 other people can even say they had a back-to-back yards per game in the top 3. That's Antonio Brown in 15 and 14. He did it back-to-back. That was it. And Calvin Johnson did it 2013 to 2011. This guy was in the top 3 in yards per game 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 straight years and counting. I expect that to continue again this year. He's just, what you're getting with him. And you have a quarterback in Matt Ryan that you don't have to worry about, can he get him the ball, because he's going to get the targets. He racks up the yards. The only negative to this guy's game, and you can talk about this a little more, is the touchdowns. They're just not there and not what you expect for an elite wide receiver. He's only had double-digit touchdowns once in his career, but take out that and the yards per game, his floor is just elite.
Oh man, elite is a great word for him, but I don't know what the word would be for his touchdown production. How about embarrassing, unacceptable? You hit on it right there. 1 year out of all those years when he's dominating the league in terms of yardage, only 1 year with 10 touchdowns? That just does not add up. And again, 6 last year, and he went 10 weeks without a touchdown. He started out strong, and then he went 10 weeks, and one of those was a bye week, but I'm going to count it because you just can't let Julio Jones go 10 weeks without a touchdown. I think if he doesn't get double-digit touchdowns, in fact, well over double-digit touchdowns, I think we need to fire Dan Quinn and Dirk Cutter immediately.
Yeah, it's just weird. Like I mentioned, all those yards. Last year he had 1,394 yards. That he hasn't had less than 1,400 yards since the season that he only played 5 games in 2013. Like, it's unbelievable how much yards this guy racks up on a game-to-game basis, and it's just unfathomable that not only has this not, it's almost unprecedented to be in the top three, and it's for 7 years and counting, but it's also almost unprecedented for a guy of this caliber to average under 6 yards or 6 touchdowns a year, or a little over six, which it's very hard to explain how he doesn't get in the end zone. It's kind of like, how Chris Carter they used to scream, all he does is score touchdowns.
Right.
Well, Julio does everything else but score the touchdowns. And for DFS, we need you to get in the end zone. But if he doesn't, I mean, he has one of the safest floors out there.
Yeah, he really does. And I just don't have faith that they'll get it done in terms of touchdowns. I mean, he's big bodied, 6'3", 220. He can go up and leap. I mean, he's the perfect specimen for a stud wide receiver. There's absolutely no reason he shouldn't get more touchdowns. And so I'll continue to target him often in good matchups because of that amazing floor with the catches and yardage. And he did miss one game last year, but he finished with 99 catches. So I expect him to go over 100 catches and put up big numbers again. Now, one small reason why he didn't get quite as many touchdowns is Calvin Ridley stepped up in his second year. He caught 63 balls for over 800 yards and scored 7 touchdowns. How do you see his progression here as we head into his third year?
I think he's a really good wide receiver, one of the better number 2 wide receivers. He could be a number 1 wide receiver for many teams out there, but you're not going to supplant a Julio Jones. He has 17 touchdowns in his first 2 years in the league. Pretty much the same receptions each year, 64 and 63. His first year, he only had 3 games above 70% snap rate, and he still scored 10 touchdowns with 821 yards. Last year, and he scored in 7 of 16 games, which is better than Julio. But last year he had 866 yards, 7 touchdowns, 6 games over 80% snap rate. So his playing time increased in his sophomore year. 4 games under 70% snap rate. So it's still very weird how he does that. But he scored 7 times in 13 games. He's the guy who scores a lot more touchdowns than Julio. I just don't know what it is. Maybe it's the double coverage, especially when you get close to the red zone. But he has a lot more touchdown upside, and he can get 1,000 yards. He was on pace for it last year before he got hurt. Very good guy to target at a cheaper price. If you look in fantasy, over the year, he was 17th in points per game for half-point PPR last year. He averaged 12.7 FanDuel points. And for DraftKings, he averaged 15.2, and he was 19th, so top 20. And when you have Matt Ryan throwing to you, there's no issues at quarterback. When you have a physical specimen, as you put it there, on Julio Jones, who does nothing wrong, on the opposite side, that you're going to get single coveraged. And this guy is very good. And if you single coverage him, he's shown that he can beat you, especially on deep plays and big plays.
Yeah, that's a great point in terms of the extra attention on Julio, and Ridley's really taken advantage of it. And he already feels more reliable in terms of getting into the end zone. You just, it's actually surprising and noteworthy when Julio Jones scores a touchdown. It's like, wow, they finally got him the ball in the red zone. But Ridley is really developing a reputation of a guy who will find pay dirt, and as you mentioned, on pace for 1,000 yards without missing those last 3 games. So I'm really excited about his future. Now, not as much star power as we continue through the wide receiver core. Next, we've got Russell Gage.
Yeah, I like Russell Gage. I was a 6th-round pick in 2018 out of LSU. Very, very small and fast guy. I remember yesterday I said Mike Evans is 6'5", 240. You wouldn't expect him to beat people down the field the way he does. This guy, you would expect to beat people down the field. He's about 6 foot, 184 pounds, so a very speedy guy. Again, he's going to play the slot with Julio on one side, Calvin Ridley on the other, and no more Austin Hooper, who we'll get to when we get to the tight end rankings. But that's a lot of targets and production that isn't there over the middle of the field that this guy could fall into, because Julio's going to get his. I mean, he's going to get his regardless. Calvin Ridley is going to get his. But Russell Gage is a very quick guy. I think he should push for 600 to 700 yards here. I mean, Matt Ryan's going to throw for 4,000 yards. He's done it for the last 6-7 years. So they're going to come somewhere. And Russell Gage is easily, after Julio and Ridley, the next man up here. Besides what Gurley's going to get you as a better pass catching back. And I kind of like this guy. He's going to be very cheap in FanDuel and DraftKings. He could get you 4 or 5 catches a game, and 40 to 70 yards as a pretty baseline. But again, with Julio not scoring as many touchdowns, and Matt Ryan should approach 30 again, they're going to have to come somewhere. And without Austin Hooper and that major production, Russell Gage might creep up to 6-7 touchdowns this year.
Yeah, that'll be fun to see is how much he can increase his production without Hooper. And last year we got a little taste of it because his production really ramped up after they traded Mohamed Sanu to the Patriots, and he started getting more snaps and more targets. In fact, in 5 of the last 9 weeks last year, he scored in double digits in fantasy points on DraftKings. So a guy in that all season, he was in the 3 to 5K range. So you really could get some value if he got in the end zone. So, you know, it'll be good. It'll be great to see how he steps up with Sanu gone, and that confidence from how he finished down the stretch. Now, the other guy we want to mention here is somebody who does not have much confidence. I don't know how he would have confidence at this point in his career, and that's Laquan Treadwell.
Yeah, former first-round pick by the Vikings. I feel that when we're saying Laquan Treadwell might have something in the tank, it's a big if. But a lot of times we have seen people who were busts, and he was a bust of the busts as a first-round pick for the Vikings. He didn't do anything.
We're not talking about a Hall of Fame bust.
Yeah, we're not talking about that. We're just talking about a guy who hasn't done anything throughout his first 4 years in the league. But now he's getting a new lease on life. He's seeing a new town, playing in a new system. Maybe something clicks. Maybe it refreshes. We've seen this happen before where people who had the talent coming out of college in multiple different sports just didn't click with that first team, and then the second team, something clicks. He's not gonna turn into a Pro Bowler anytime soon. He's not gonna supplant Calvin Ridley for the number 2 role, but maybe he gets you 400 to 500 yards here and there. Maybe if someone gets hurt, he steps into a bigger role as a very cheap DFS long shot target. But he has Matt Ryan throwing to him now. He has everything in place to maybe see the potential that he once had. And if not, I mean, he's not going to cost you anything. If he looks terrible in the league, you're going to leave him over in the first couple of weeks. But if something clicks for him, he still has blazing speed that he can beat people down the field, and potential to possibly break a couple big plays out there.
Yeah, this is really go time for him. Just trending in the wrong direction in Minnesota, and they certainly weren't a pass-heavy offense last year. But you know, his snap rate went down to 17%. 9 catches for a former first rounder. It's just, again, unacceptable. And so he really needs to turn it around. And, you know, maybe the change of scenery and hooking up with Matt Ryan will be what he needs. Now, the other big change here, we've talked about the big running back who's left town, the receiver who was traded, and now for the tight ends, it's Austin Hooper. And man, what a reliable target for Matt Ryan, a guy who had 75 catches last year, almost 800 yards, got 6 touchdowns. He just quickly rose to the top of the rankings for tight end performance. But he's gone now, and they've got Hayden Hurst. They basically took the second-round pick from the Patriots in the Sanu trade, traded it to Baltimore, which really is tight endville. And so they plucked one of the multitude of tight ends out of Baltimore, and it's Hayden Hurst. So how do you see this shaking out?
Yeah, who, like we mentioned, we touched on it. Hooper had 97 targets in 13 games last year. That's a lot of production that's going to have to be replaced by someone or multiple people, most likely. And then Sanu, you touched on it. He got traded midway through the season. Also, production that you're going to have to replace and find somewhere. But Hayden Hurst is definitely going to get the first crack at it. He was a first-round pick in 2018 out of South Carolina, the first tight end off the board ahead of fellow teammate Mark Andrews, etc. He was productive in college, not anything that productive for a tight end in college. He had 12.8 yards per catch and 1,180 yards his sophomore and junior year. I mean, someone's going to have to step up. Matt Ryan likes his tight ends, so I don't see anything terrible from him. He's only 27 years old. This will be his third year in the league. He's going to get a prominent role out there, and that's a lot of production to replace. He hasn't shown anything right now that he's going to burst in and be like that guy, but I would be, if I didn't pay up for a big tight end and in the right matchup where teams can't face tight ends like Arizona Cardinals, who couldn't guard the tight end for their life last year, he's a guy I'll definitely look at as a cheap option. I mean, the tight end position in football is a crapshoot after the first 5-6, especially on a week-to-week basis. So you just got to find the right matchup for them in particular and target it like that.
Yeah, I'll definitely invest in Hayden Hurst. He's shown real success when given the opportunity. His catch rate is almost 77%. And the thing is, playing with Mark Andrews and all those other tight ends, he only had 2 games last year with 5 targets or more. And he ended up with 2 games in double digits in terms of fantasy scoring. And I do think he can take the step. Solid speed, 4.67 40, big, strong guy. Got in the end zone twice last year. And I will target him early in the season because if he can develop any sort of chemistry with Matt Ryan like Hooper had, as you stated, Ryan's more than happy to check it down to the tight end, especially with all that attention on Julio. And you got to figure there's going to be as much, if not more, attention paid to Calvin Ridley in year 3. Hurst has a real opportunity here early in the season to really provide value before his price increases.
Yeah, when you're playing with star guys on the outside, your chances to get open and see balls from a quarterback who's, like you mentioned, Brady, doesn't discriminate, just opens up right there. And if he can separate and get some separation, he's going to have a pretty good season.
Other tight end worth mentioning is Jaden Graham. Only got 10 targets last year, but he caught 9 of them for 149 yards. That's 16.6 per reception. And he had a game against New Orleans where he went 4 catches for 41 and a touchdown. So, again, just a name to remember in case Hurst goes down. So, Santino, let's wrap up on the defense and the draft. You've touched on it a little bit with a couple of the early draft picks. But again, they didn't draft any position skill players on offense. They went heavy in the draft again on defense.
Yeah. And good for them because they don't need the skill positions. They already have them covered. And they replaced one with Todd Gurley. But yeah, their first round pick, AJ Terrell, cornerback out of Clemson, really good in college. He should step right into that number 1 cornerback role. Something that they struggled with last year, but he should provide some stabilization, whatever the word is, to that deep back room.
The Falcons have been trying to figure that out themselves. How do we get some stability on defense here?
Yeah, I think that's why I'm wearing the colors. I can't say it either. We both don't know what that is right now. But their second round pick, Marlon Davidson, D tackle out of Auburn, he's going to have a pretty decent role, but their star player on defense is Grady Jarrett, who plays the same position as him, right in that middle D tackle. So I think he's going to alternate with him there. Maybe he'll spell Tyler Davidson, the other Davidson, a little bit, but that guy's really good as well, both against the pass and the run. Then round 3, they drafted a center, but Alex Mack was probably their best tackle last year, 5-time Pro Bowler, or best lineman last year, 5-time Pro Bowler. Round 4, they drafted Michael Walker, linebacker out of Fresno State. He has a chance to start on the outside. Right now they have him slotted in behind Deion Jones, another one of their better players, but I think he could start over a guy that they traded for, Charles Harris. And then another round 4, they drafted a safety out of Cal, and round 7, they drafted a punter. So, like you mentioned, they went heavy on defense. They know that their offense is pretty much there. Their offensive line struggled, yes, but 2 guys that they drafted in the first round last year were part of those struggles. And they need to fix this defense if they want to compete in a division with Drew Brees and now Tom Brady.
Absolutely. You mentioned Drew Brees, and that's who we're going to cover today. But we'll give you the day off. We'll have Shane come in and take over for the Saints. In the meantime, where can everybody find you on Twitter, Santino?
You can find me at Santino Caccone. That's at SANTINO CACCONE.
Excellent. And you can find me on Twitter at Language Olympic. You can find the entire crew at DFSCoachTalk. Coach likes us to mention his favorite charity, which is mambaon3.org. That is Joe Sarvati, the leader of this bunch. And as I mentioned, we are going to wrap up the NFC South coverage tomorrow with the Saints. So we'll see what Shane brings to the table in terms of his wardrobe. Santino, any final thoughts on this Falcons Wednesday?
I like it. Falcons Wednesday. That kind of, it's not the same letters, but it rolls off the tongue. Falcon Wednesday. No, I think one thing that would be funny is if Julio had that year where he scored a ton of touchdowns, when Todd Gurley arrives, who is known for just getting in the end zone. It would be pretty ironic, but I'd like to see that.
That'd be fun to see. It's a lot of stars in that building, yep. And they need to pull it together and get some W's. But it's not going to be easy. But certainly fun to watch. And I had fun with you again, Santino. Thank you so much for taking us to the next level here on Falcons Wednesday. So on behalf of Santino Caccone, I am Andrew Hanson. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please check back in again tomorrow when Shane and I cover the Saints here on DFS Coach Talk.